As Ruth arrives for the session, Ruth reveals her desire to talk about her parents. Out of fear of forgetting them, the counselor probes deeper, questioning whether this fear stems from their absence or from a tangible sense of memory slipping away. Ruth expresses a poignant reality. It is neither. She feels as though she's losing a part of herself, unsure whether she's the girl in the room with him or the one traversing the nowhere. The counselor attempts to steer the conversation towards understanding her nightmare, emphasizing the need to understand where she goes when she sleeps. Ruth challenged the session's true purpose. Despite her frustration, she agrees to his request, under the condition that no wires be attached to her head and no machines used tonight. The counselor agrees, promising an engaging session ahead in a role reversal. He will lay on the bed blindfolded, deliberately depriving his senses to enter a self-induced hypnagogic state. It's the borderland between wakefulness and sleep. This state will allow him to focus deeply. Ruth's eyes roam the room, finally landing on a picture of a young girl. Intrigued, she asks if that is his daughter, Cece. The counselor tells Ruth that Cece is actually his sister, which catches Ruth off guard. Moving on, Ruth starts telling her recent nightmare, describing the sensation of floating through darkness, suspended without solid ground beneath her feet. This darkness transitions into an underground brick tunnel. Ruth vividly recalls a moment when she noticed a boy with dirty boots and a flickering lantern at his waist. Their eyes met, and he eagerly announced the presence of critters in the tunnels, drawing the attention of other curious children who gazed down from every drain above. The counselor, intrigued, contemplated whether these children awaited Ruth's arrival or if they were part of a cyclic event, like an annual holiday celebrated in the depths of the nowhere. Moving through the sewers, she caught a glimpse of a large man with a peculiar buzzing gadget. The man holding a heavy sack filled with mysterious contents. Across from her, a pipe became clogged by a grey mass, obstructing the flow of the sewage. The mass was alive and curious, wriggled free, and revealed itself as a tiny creature with a cone-shaped head. Ruth, drawn to its peculiar charm and whimsical movements, affectionately named it a mushroom fairy. Approaching cautiously, she extended a hand, and the creature mirrored her movements with a sense of recognition, as if they were old friends, reunited in the surreal realm. The fairy led her through the twisting tunnels, their footsteps echoing through the sewer walls. Ruth's senses were heightened. Eventually, the fairy came to a halt in front of a rusted, decrepit door, its hinges groaning in a protest as it swung open to reveal a dimly lit maintenance room. Ruth's eyes widened in astonishment at the sight that greeted her. A chaotic jumble of discarded items, ranging from mundane debris to glimmering treasures, and piles of tarnished trinkets and forgotten relics filled the room. Among the scattered heaps, Ruth's gaze was drawn to a child's propeller cap, its vibrant colors standing out amidst the trapped surroundings. The atmosphere grew visibly tense as Ruth's attention was suddenly drawn to the approaching footsteps echoing through the tunnel. Panic conquered her heart as she watched the mushroom fairy dart for cover amidst the mound of mismatched mittens. Without hesitation, Ruth followed suit. Peering cautiously from her hiding place, she observed the man's entrance into the room. Ruth watched as the man shed his plastic suit, revealing a grotesque visage beneath. His body was contorted and emaciated, as if he had become one with the decaying sewer itself. The swollen throbbing mass on his back, which she had mistaken for a sack, pulsed with a sickening rhythm, like a grotesque heart beating in the darkness. Ruth's breath caught in her throat as she realized the true nature of the man before her. He was a twisted embodiment of the sewer's corruption, a grotesque fusion of flesh and filth. Interrupting her narrative, the counselor voiced his confusion. Although Ruth annoyed by his skepticism and the interruption of her flow, Ruth shot back, and her voice laced with irritation. Despite the counselor's attempts to let go and enter the trance-like state, he struggled with the confines of his mind. Ruth, growing increasingly impatient, mocked his feeble effort, urging him to try as he had always told her. With a sigh, Ruth plunged back into her retelling. She watched the small con creature creeping away towards the looming figure of the man. Ruth remembered the children she had encountered before, all of whom she had been unable to save. Ruth grabbed the mushroom fairy and bolted from the room. The man, enraged, the pursuit was on. The man's strange gadget buzzing ominously as he closed in on her, turning down one tunnel after another. Ruth's sense of direction grew increasingly muddled until she found herself at a dead end. Lantern lights from above revealed the mischievous children she had encountered earlier, their chanting filling the air. Snatch a gift, before they all sent adrift. They jeered, their voices growing louder and more frenzied. Desperation clawed at Ruth as she realized the man had cut off her only exit. Trapped between the relentless pursuit of the man and the taunting children, the mushroom fairy squirming in her arm, the tiny creature slipped from her grasp and darted towards a pile of rubble. Ruth watched as the fairy deftly navigated the obstacles, disappearing through a crack in the wall. Ruth knew she had to follow. She pushed through the opening just as the man's furious cries echoed behind her. As she looked back one final time, she saw his milky eye peering through the hole. Suddenly, the rumbling returned with a deafening roar, shaking the chamber to its core. The man, overcome with fear, abandoned his pursuit, and Ruth was left alone in the echoing darkness. The cheers of the mischievous children grew louder and louder. In that moment, Ruth knew that whatever awaited her on the other side of the wall, it was something both terrifying and inevitable. She realized that the counselor was still awake. Angered by the counselor's statement that what she experiences is a gift that he does not have, Ruth's voice rises with frustration. She lashes out, telling him she would trade places with him in a heartbeat if it meant she could finally be free of the torment in her head. Frustrated and exhausted, she asks if she should continue, and the counselor agrees. Ruth recounts feeling as if the very sewer itself was being violently shaken in anger. As she ran, Ruth noticed hundreds of tiny bodies running in panic ahead of her, their small bodies a blur of motion. She realized they were the mushroom fairies. Ruth knew they were fleeing from something, a tidal wave of water rushing through the sewer with terrifying force. With the wave mere feet away, Ruth frantically searched for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. The wave crashed over her, pulling her under. In the chaos, she struggled to swim against the current. Just as she thought she would be swept away, the wave suddenly stopped, leaving her gasping for breath. As the water carried her down the maze of tunnels, Ruth saw the Candleman, the figure who haunted her dream. The counselor urged her to recount her encounter with the Candleman in detail, believing he held the key to their understanding of the nightmares. Despite the counselor's insistence that the Candleman was her tormentor, Ruth began to doubt this. Unlike before, she was now able to speak to the Candleman, to question him why he brought her to the world of nowhere, what he wanted from her. The Candleman's response was cryptic. He said with a riddle, "Cross the sill, sink in a twinkling, cast aside the old sleep, to sleep again." Ruth demanded answers, but before she could finish, the Candleman spoke again with yet another riddle. "Plight not within, but without. Here all banes are set free." The counselor grew frustrated with the Candleman riddles, believing them to be deliberate traps. He swore to solve them to uncover the truth, but Ruth interrupted him. She had already solved them. The answer for such riddle is, by giving herself to the Candleman's world, she would be free of her afflictions. Every time she entered the Candleman realm, the nowhere, she found herself relieved from her headaches, her parasites, and her tests. As Ruth spoke, the counselor realized with growing unease that she was beginning to believe the Candleman's word. He tried to stop her, to tell her that what she believed was not true. But Ruth, her eyes full of pain and torment, would not be swayed. She was convinced that the Candleman held the key to her salvation, that by surrendering herself to his world, she would finally find peace. Ruth, frustrated, she lashes out at the counselor, expressing a desire to be with the Candleman rather than enduring her current existence with him. She longs to escape, to be taken away from everything she knows, including him. The counselor, attempting to reason with her, explains that by voicing such desires, she unwittingly falls into the Candleman's trap, as his ultimate goal is to take her and not to save her. Ruth turns her gaze towards the counselor and declares that Cece likely felt the same way she feels, that his sister too probably felt a sense of relief the moment she was taken away. The counselor, struck by the mention of Cece, stands up abruptly, his emotions raw. As he exits, he says, "I was only a boy." Later, the counselor returns, still visibly shaken by Ruth's words, no longer able to continue the session. He abruptly declares that they are finished for the night and instructs Ruth to leave, sending her back to her room. Ruth's eyes catch a glimpse of a sheet of paper on the desk with her name on it while he was away. Demanding to know its contents, the counselor reveals it's a brain scan showing a tumor. Ruth, as she realizes her suspicions about something inside her head were true, the realization hits her hard that the cure for her water sickness likely caused the tumor to grow. She pleads with the counselor to know how bad it is, but he responds coldly, explaining that a mass on the brain is never a good sign. Ruth cries of frustration as she demands to know why he kept this information from her. The counselor explains that he withheld it until it was absolutely necessary. He then dismisses her, instructing her to leave. With this session now concluded, she reaches for the jar of candy, informing the counselor she will be taking 2 sweets tonight. Moments later, the counselor stands in Ruth's chamber, the apparatus in hand, and Ruth lies peacefully asleep. As he sets the machine in motion, the clock strikes past midnight, and the counselor observes with bated breath as the screen comes to life, casting a glow across the room. An image begins to materialize, a vague expanse of darkness that seems to pulse with unseen energy. Ruth's restless murmurs echoes in the background. Suddenly an uncanny shape emerges from the shadows, a form obscured by a veil of mist. Straining his eyes, the counselor watches as the shape unites into an ovular silhouette, its shape shifting and repelling like liquid. The silhouette splits down the center, revealing a radiant light. The counselor's senses falter as the brightness intensifies. He discerns the unmistakable form of an eye, the eye gaze fixed upon him. Transfixed by this revelation, as the glowing reaches its peak, the apparatus trembles with its energy, and the screen fractures into pieces. The counselor stands amidst the remnants of the unshattered screen, and Ruth, he realizes, had disappeared, marking her crossing the threshold into the realm of nowhere.